The room smelled like dust and regret. My father's voice trembled as he read words that didn't sound like his, but like theirs. Robert sat back, arms crossed, satisfied. William poured another glass of wine he didn't earn. The paper said I was no longer part of the family trust, just erased. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. Because some betrayals don't need noise, they echo on their own. I left before anyone noticed the cork rolling off the table, the last drop of wine staining the wood like blood. That night, I promised myself one thing. If they wanted me gone from the family's legacy, I'd build my own. And someday, they'd need mine to survive. I grew up among vines. While other kids spent summers at lakes or camps, I spent mine with pruning shears in hand, chasing sunlight between the rows. The air always smelled like dust and sweet decay. My father used to call it the scent of patience. He said the land remembers who listens. I believed him with all the innocence a daughter could have. Maybe that was my first mistake. Robert and William never cared for the soil. They liked the spotlight, the magazine interviews, the luxury tastings, the illusion that success was something you could inherit. They never saw the early mornings when fog clung to my boots or the small cuts that bled when the vines bit back. They didn't know that the land humbles everyone eventually. When I left for college, I didn't go to study finance like they did. I chose agricultural science, soil composition, irrigation management, sustainable crops. Robert laughed when he heard. "So you're learning how to babysit dirt?" he said. William joined in, his favorite kind of laughter, the kind that made me feel small. But dirt, I discovered, never lies. It tells you exactly what it needs if you care enough to listen. People aren't that honest. When I returned home after graduation, I came armed with ideas, new pruning techniques, climate-adaptive soil mapping, precision watering. My father listened, his smile kind but weary. He was aging, his lungs weaker, his steps slower. I could feel the balance shifting, not just in him, but in the house, in the hierarchy. Robert and William were already circling, presenting investors, showing off spreadsheets and projections like trophies. They wanted the family name on glossy labels and billboards. I wanted roots, the kind that went deeper than profit margins. We stopped walking the same rows together. The day I knew things had changed, the sky was pale and the earth brittle. My father paused by the fence line and said quietly, "You've got your mother's heart." He meant it as comfort. But I felt it as a warning that maybe softness had no place in this house anymore. When the family trust shifted, no one said it aloud, but everyone knew. I was being pushed aside, carefully, politely, like moving a glass too close to the edge of a table. I didn't fight. I'd learned that arguments with men who mistake cruelty for competence never end in fairness. So I smiled through dinners, signed the papers they placed in front of me, and kept my hands busy, at the research lab, in side projects, anywhere I could make something that was truly mine. Every paycheck, every late-night contract went into a quiet fund no one knew about. They called me sentimental. I'd show them what sentiment can grow into. After the trust changed hands, things at the estate grew quieter. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that hums with tension, the kind that makes you aware of every breath you take. Robert became the acting director. William oversaw operations, which meant he showed up twice a week, gave orders, and left before sunset. My father, already fading, stayed mostly in his study, surrounded by the ghosts of his own decisions. I was still there, technically managing vineyard analytics, soil health, seasonal projections, pest control. But no one read my reports anymore. The same data that once earned praise now ended up buried under emails and excuses. Sometimes I caught Robert using my research in meetings, word for word, without so much as a glance in my direction. It wasn't theft in their eyes, it was correction. The first time I realized how invisible I'd become was at a regional wine symposium in Santa Rosa. Our vineyard was up for an award in sustainable innovation, a project I'd designed, tested, and implemented. Robert stood on stage accepting the plaque. He even repeated my favorite line, "The vines don't lie." The audience laughed, charmed. I clapped with everyone else, nails biting into my palm. After the ceremony, he handed me the plaque in the parking lot. "Technically, it's your work," he said, lighting a cigarette. Then he smiled. "But image matters, you know?" That was the first time I felt the hollow kind of anger. The kind that doesn't burn hot, just steady, like coals waiting for air. William wasn't any better. He treated me like an employee, scheduling me for vineyard tours so he could take meetings in town. Once a tourist mistook me for the event coordinator. He didn't correct them. He just laughed and said, "She's good with details." That night, I sat in my car long after everyone left. The estate lights glowed across the valley, golden and untouchable. I remember thinking how beauty can feel like a cage when it's no longer yours. I started making lists, not of grievances, but of opportunities. Land parcels, deed records, regional maps, old contracts my brothers never bothered to read. Every late night in that car became a planning session. It wasn't about revenge yet, not really, it was about ownership. About taking back something they assumed was permanently theirs. Every humiliation became a brick, every insult a foundation. They were teaching me how to disappear in plain sight, and how to use invisibility as armor. They shut the door, I built another one. The vineyard became quieter after my father passed. Robert and William wore grief like tailored suits, perfect for photographs, easy to remove. Within weeks, they'd converted his study into an executive office. I wasn't invited to the meeting that followed, but the results were clear. New labels, new investors, same arrogance. I kept my distance, still running soil reports for the archive, a habit more than a duty now. Late one evening, while cross-checking irrigation data, I stumbled on a reference to a neighboring property, Thorn Vineyard. I hadn't thought about that place in years. It sat just beyond our western fence line, a strip of land that locals called Thorn's Folly, a failing vineyard cursed by drought and mismanagement. Robert used to joke it was where dreams go to die. Curiosity pulled me down a rabbit hole. I dug through old county records, faded survey maps, handwritten ledgers scanned into PDFs. It felt like archaeology, each file revealing how land, water, and arrogance had tangled over generations. That's when I found it, a deed dated 1914, barely legible but unmistakable. The original water rights for our estate, the very lifeline of our vines, were tied to the well on the Thorn property. No one had ever separated the titles properly. Technically, whoever owned Thorn Vineyard controlled the flow beneath both properties. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the documents. I wasn't excited. I was terrified, the kind of fear that feels too powerful to be wrong. I called a friend from college, now a water rights attorney in Napa. He confirmed it. The rights were still active, still enforceable, still transferable. For the first time in years, I felt a spark that wasn't anger. It was purpose. I didn't rush. I spent weeks researching valuations, appraisals, local gossip. The vineyard was dying, its owner desperate. He'd already listed it quietly, no public bids, no fanfare. Perfect. I liquidated my savings, sold my small stock portfolio, and scheduled the meeting. The owner was an old man, more dust than voice. He looked at me across the table and said, "You really want this place? It's cursed." I smiled. "Good," I said, "so am I." The purchase was simple, a few signatures, a handshake, and a silence that felt heavier than celebration. When I walked the property for the first time, the air was dry and electric. Weeds clawed at my boots. The vines were brittle, nearly skeletal, and then I saw it, the old stone well. Cracked, sun-bleached, forgotten. I stood beside it, wind cutting through the valley, and whispered the only word that mattered. "Mine!" Everyone saw barren soil. I saw leverage buried in the dust. The first thing I did after signing the deed was change the locks. Not because anyone cared enough to break in, but because I needed the sound of a key turning, something that finally belonged to me. The house on Thorn Vineyard was small, neglected, and smelled like mildew and loss. The floors creaked, the windows rattled when the wind hit them. But when I stepped outside, the view was endless. Rows of dying vines under a washed-out California sky. To anyone else, it looked like a failure. To me, it looked like a blueprint. I set up my laptop on the kitchen counter, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence. I started digging. Water district filings, county land divisions, environmental permits from the 1940s. It became an obsession, tracing every document back to the well behind my house. Every line, every signature told a story, Generations had depended on this water before my family fenced it off and forgot where it came from. I drove to the county office in Napa the next morning, pretending to be just another buyer with questions about irrigation. The clerk, a woman with red glasses and a coffee stain on her sleeve, pulled up digital archives and muttered dates under her breath. Then she frowned. "These are old," she said, "and they're still active. That's rare." She turned the monitor toward me. There it was, water rights, Thorn Parcel 1914 active. My chest tightened. All those years, all that arrogance, my brothers never checked. They just assumed control was permanent, that the world bent to their inheritance. But paper doesn't care about pride, paper remembers. I took copies of every file and brought them to a water rights attorney in St. Helena, an old colleague from grad school. He spent an hour reading in silence, lips pressed thin. Finally, he looked up. "Whoever owns this land," he said slowly, "owns the priority claim for groundwater extraction in this subbasin. Legally, that means you outrank everyone around you, including your family." For a long moment, I didn't speak. The sound of the clock filled the room, soft and steady like a heartbeat. I wasn't smiling. It wasn't joy I felt. It was gravity. Power has a weight when you've lived most of your life without it. I walked out of his office and sat in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel. Outside, the sky was pale, merciless. The kind of sky that never promises rain. I whispered it to the empty valley anyway. "Thank you, Dad, for teaching me how to listen." The wind carried dust across the hood, dry and shimmering. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't buy land, I bought their next drought. The first season was a disaster. Half the vines didn't make it through the summer. The soil was brittle, exhausted from years of neglect. I spent every dawn walking the rows, mapping moisture levels by hand, watching the sunrise break over land that didn't yet love me back. Failure has a sound, the crack of a dead vine snapping under your boot, the silence after another irrigation line bursts. I learned to live with it, to listen to it. I hired 3 workers from the local co-op, people who didn't flinch at hard labor, who understood quiet more than conversation. We tore out diseased roots, planted new grafts, replaced the ancient pumps with solar valves and drip systems I'd designed years ago but never got to implement at the family estate. Every bolt, every hose, every seed felt like defiance in motion. By fall, green began to return, not everywhere, but enough. The first leaf buds were the color of forgiveness. I named the property Vidian Vineyards. A name born from the Latin for green, for life, for reclamation. The rebrand was subtle at first. I designed the labels myself. Minimalist, no crest, no legacy name. Just the word Vidian embossed in silver against deep green glass. Robert and William mocked it the first time they saw an article mentioning me in the Napa Valley Register. "A hobby project," Robert said. "Cute," William added. I didn't respond. I'd learned the art of silence. It rattles louder than words ever could. The next 2 years passed like seasons blending, one harvest bleeding into the next. Each year the yield improved. Each year critics started to notice. They called my wines unconventional, bold, driven by precision rather than tradition. To me it was simple. I listened to the vines, they listened back. At the regional fair in Sonoma, Vidian's 2018 Dry Reserve won Best Emerging Vineyard. I didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, I stood by the old well, holding the first bottled batch in my hands, deep green label catching the last of the sunset. It tasted sharp, clean, alive. It tasted like proof. My team celebrated that night. We drank by the bonfire behind the house, music low, laughter easy. Someone asked if I'd invite my brothers to see what I'd built. I smiled, watching sparks rise into the dark. "They'll see it," I said, "eventually." The old well stood behind us, no longer a relic but a heartbeat. Every creak of its pulley, every drop of water echoing down its throat reminded me of what power sounded like. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. Success didn't roar, it whispered, and I was finally learning its language. The first warning came in the spring. A local paper mentioned record low rainfall in Napa County, the driest season in decades. I folded the page, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slowly. The air already felt thinner, harsher, like even the valley was holding its breath. By midsummer, the ground cracked. The river that once glittered along the highway turned to a ribbon of mud. Reservoirs shrank to mirrors of dust. Everywhere pumps groaned and failed. At Vidian, we rationed carefully. My systems, solar pumps, moisture sensors, the underground cistern connected to the old well, kept us alive. Every morning I checked the gauges myself. Numbers dropping, but steady, sustainable, enough. The valley, though, wasn't so lucky. One by one, neighboring vineyards sent out notices, temporary shutdowns, yield reduction, emergency irrigation requests. And then came the calls from my brother's estate. First polite, then panicked. Their vines were collapsing, leaves curling brown before harvest. Their reservoirs dry as parchment. Their estate, once an emblem of power, was suffocating under its own thirst. Robert left me a voicemail one evening. "Hey, we might need to collaborate," he said, his voice thin, uncertain. "You've got reserves, right? We can negotiate water delivery, short term." I played it twice, not for pleasure, but for confirmation. The tone was something I'd never heard from him before, humility wrapped in desperation. For weeks, I said nothing. I kept working, pruning, bottling, focusing on my own crop. Vidian's vines thrived against the pale dust of the valley, their color almost unnatural in the endless heat. Photographers came, articles followed. Miracle Vineyard defies historic drought. My brothers must have read every word. By August, they were forced to cut staff and cancel shipments. The estate's gates stayed closed more often. William tried to appeal to the county, arguing historical rights and family legacy. The same arrogance that once made them powerful now made them blind. Because legacy doesn't irrigate roots. When Robert finally showed up at my gate, I was in the field, checking vines. He looked older, smaller somehow. Dust clung to his collar, sweat darkened his shirt. He didn't waste time. "You've got water," he said. I nodded. "You need to share." I smiled faintly. "You mean buy?" His jaw tightened. "We're family." "Exactly," I said, "and that's why you should have known better." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between us was the sound of tables turning. That night, I stood by the well, the same stone mouth they once called useless. The wind howled through the valley, dry and relentless. I dropped a pebble inside and waited for the echo. It came, soft, deep, alive. They once mocked my well for being dry. Now they pray it runs for them. Robert called again 2 days later. This time, he didn't bother pretending it was a collaboration. "We need to talk," he said, voice clipped, rehearsed. "I'll be at your vineyard in an hour." He arrived with William, both wearing suits that didn't fit the heat. They looked like men trying to dress their desperation in authority. I met them in the tasting room, sunlight spilling across the polished oak table. Funny how the tables always come back? Robert started first. "We're in crisis," he said. "Our wells are depleted. Our vineyards will die without water." William added quickly, "You have more than you need. We just need temporary access. We can work out payment." I poured 3 glasses of Vidian's 2018 dry reserve and placed one in front of each of them. Neither touched theirs. "I built my systems carefully," I said. "I ration, recycle, sustain. You built your empire on excess." Robert leaned forward. "This isn't about pride, it's survival." "That's what you said the day you took my inheritance," I replied. "You called it the future of the estate needing strong, unified hands." He flinched. William stared at the table. "I'm offering market rate," Robert said finally, his voice thin. "Whatever your contract terms, we'll sign." I slid a document across the table, already prepared, already notarized. He scanned the first line and froze. It wasn't just a water agreement. It was a purchase option, the right for Vidian to acquire a section of their estate in exchange for sustained water delivery. Fair, legal, binding. Control traded for survival. He looked up, anger flickering beneath exhaustion. "You're serious?" I nodded. "You taught me to treat business like blood. I'm just using your lessons." Silence filled the room. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hiss of summer wind through the vents. Finally, Robert exhaled, his hand shaking slightly as he signed. William followed without a word. I countersigned, slid the papers back into the folder and sealed them. "For what it's worth," Robert said, his voice dry, "Dad would have hated this." I met his eyes. "No," I said softly, "he would have recognized it." I lifted my glass and drank slowly, the taste rich, cool, earned. They stood but didn't leave immediately, maybe waiting for me to gloat. But I didn't. Revenge doesn't always need applause. Sometimes it just needs witnesses. As they walked out, the light caught the green label on the bottle, Vidian. My name, my roots, my water. Theirs now, only by my permission. When the door shut behind them, I turned toward the window. The well stood in the distance, half-shadowed, steady. The air was dry, but my fields shimmered with life. For years they drained me dry. I just learned how to redirect the flow. In the weeks that followed, the valley changed. The drought didn't end, but its victims were easier to spot. Wilted vines, half-empty barrels, silence where harvest songs used to echo. At Vidian, we still worked at dawn, still measured each drop like it was sacred. Our fields shimmered against the gray hills, a defiance written in green. My brothers kept their estate running on borrowed time and borrowed water. Each shipment invoice arrived like a confession. They paid on time at first, then late, then not at all. By the end of the quarter, the contract's clause triggered. Vidian assumed ownership of a portion of their land. No court fights, no threats, just signatures and silence I didn't celebrate. Paper victories are loud only to the ones who lost. Rumors spread quickly. Reporters called it a power shift in Napa's old bloodlines. I called it maintenance. My lawyers handled the acquisitions while I stayed in the vineyard, pruning, teaching new workers the rhythm of the soil. Sometimes, when the sun hit just right, I could see the outline of my family's old estate in the distance, the mansion roof glinting like a ghost of wealth that no longer held meaning. Robert stopped calling. William tried once to meet for lunch to talk about moving forward. I declined politely. Some bridges don't burn, they dry out. Still, I wasn't cruel. When the county imposed stricter water use regulations, I made sure Vidian's new infrastructure provided stability for nearby smaller vineyards. We created a community reservoir project, sustainable, cooperative. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman they erased was now the reason others survived. At night, I walked through the vines barefoot, feeling the cool soil between my toes. It felt alive again, forgiving. Sometimes I'd hear laughter from my small crew, the hum of equipment, the clinking of bottles being loaded for export. I'd think of my father then, his voice saying, "The land remembers who listens." I finally understood what he meant. It doesn't remember your name. It remembers your care. When the first rain finally came that winter, I stood outside without an umbrella. Water slid down my face, warm as relief. I looked toward the old well, the one that started it all. Its stone walls were dark with moisture, its rope slick again with purpose. I placed my hand on the rim, whispered, "Thank you." Not to the well, not to the rain, but to the silence that taught me everything. I didn't destroy them, I just stopped watering what hurt me. A year passed before the valley began to breathe again. The drought had broken, but its memory clung to everything, to the soil, to the vines, to me. Rain fell in soft intervals that winter, and I learned to listen to it the same way I once listened to silence. Vidian had grown beyond anything I imagined. Our bottles lined shelves from Napa to New York, though I rarely left the vineyard. Success, I'd learned, wasn't about noise. It was about steadiness, the quiet rhythm of work done right. I lived alone in the small house overlooking the rows, surrounded by life that used to feel impossible. Most mornings I walked barefoot along the vines, the ground cool and damp underfoot. The air smelled of wet earth and ripening fruit, the scent of survival. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the kitchen window and almost didn't recognize her. A woman who had once been erased, now rooted so deeply she couldn't be moved. Robert and William still owned parts of the family estate. They were rebuilding slowly, cautiously. Our conversations were brief, polite, the kind you have with people you used to love but no longer trust. They never apologized, and I never asked them to. Some debts can't be repaid with words, only with distance. One evening, I hosted a small harvest dinner for my team. We ate outside under strings of soft white lights, laughter carrying across the vines. When the plates were cleared, I poured one last round of Vidian's dry reserve. The glass caught the amber glow of the lanterns, reflecting it onto the table like liquid sunlight. It looked almost golden, the same hue as the cork I'd pocketed years ago at that final family meeting. I took it out that night and set it beside my glass. The circle had closed. Later, when everyone had gone home, I walked to the old well. It stood where it always had, quiet, solid, patient. The rope was dark again, damp from the evening mist. I leaned over and listened. No wind, no creak, just the faint echo of water deep below. Alive, steady, eternal. I thought about my father's words, the land remembers who listens. He was right. It remembered the pain, the effort, the forgiveness. And it remembered me. I stayed there a long time, tracing the stone with my fingers until the chill of night crept in. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger or victory, just peace. Justice isn't always loud, sometimes it's just peaceful. Sometimes I wonder how many of us spend our lives waiting for an apology that never comes. I used to think closure meant hearing the words, "I'm sorry." Now I know better. Closure isn't something you're given, it's something you build. And sometimes it looks a lot like peace. When I walk these vineyards at night, the rows seem endless, a quiet sea of green under silver light. Each leaf holds a memory. Some are sweet, some still sting. But they all belong to me now. The land no longer feels like a battlefield, it feels like home. I still hear my brother's name sometimes, whispered in interviews, printed in small local articles about the recovery of the Mercer estate. It doesn't bother me. They rebuilt their version of legacy, and I rebuilt mine. The difference is mine grew from truth. People ask how I stayed calm, how I didn't lash out, expose them, humiliate them the way they humiliated me. The answer's simple, I didn't need to. Because when you rise without revenge, the silence itself becomes your proof. My father's words echo more clearly now than ever. The land remembers who listens. And maybe so does justice, it just listens longer. I've learned that revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it's creation, the rebuilding of self after someone tried to erase you. It's standing on what was once your ruin and realizing you've turned it into a garden. So if you've ever been betrayed, cut out, or overlooked, don't rush to scream. Build. Grow. Let success do the talking. Because one day they'll hear your silence louder than any words you could have said. And when that day comes, remember this, you're not alone in the rebuilding. There's a whole world of stories like mine, stories of pain that turned into power, and endings that healed instead of burned. This is Heartless Revenge, where every story reminds you that the quietest victories are often the ones that last forever.